The briefing room at Vechta Air Base smelled of cigarette smoke and damp wool. Outside, December winds scraped frost across the windows of northern Germany, but inside, the pilots of Jagdgeschwader 26 lounged in their chairs with the casual confidence of men who believed themselves immortal. Hauptmann Erich Voss leaned against the wall, his leather jacket creased from 2 years of combat, his Knight's Cross catching the dim overhead light. At 25, he had 47 kills painted beneath his cockpit canopy, 47 enemy aircraft reduced to smoke and wreckage across the skies of Europe. His face still carried the smooth features of youth, but his eyes had aged beyond his years. "Flying fortresses," someone read aloud from the intelligence report, and the room erupted in laughter. "Fortresses!" Lieutenant Hans Becker slapped his knee. "They should call them flying coffins, aluminum boxes stuffed with frightened boys." Eric smirked, crushing his cigarette into an ashtray made from a British propeller hub. The Americans think if they bolt enough machine guns onto a bomber, it becomes invincible. They fly in straight lines, neat formations, like they're on parade for their mothers. More laughter. These men had torn through British Lancasters and Russian Stormoviks. They had mastered the art of deflection shooting, of diving from the sun, of exploiting every weakness in bomber defenses. The Americans, with their shiny new aircraft and untested crews, seemed like lambs wandering into a wolf's den. Oberst Werner Molders, their squadron commander, stood at the front of the room. He was older than the rest, 32, with lines carved deep around his mouth. He'd seen friends die, too many friends. He let the laughter die naturally before speaking. "Gentlemen," his voice cut through the smoke, "I've read the reports from the raids on Wilhelmshaven and Emden. Yes, we shot down many of their bombers, but we also lost 11 fighters in 2 days." The room quieted. "The Americans are learning. Their gunners coordinate fire. Their formations create overlapping fields of defense. They absorb losses we cannot." He paused, his gaze settling on Eric. "You cannot kill steel with pride, Hauptmann. Remember that tomorrow when you meet them over Bremen." Eric nodded, but inside the warning slid off him like water from oiled leather. 11 losses. They'd claimed 60 American bombers in those same raids. The mathematics favored the hunters, always had. Tomorrow would be no different. As the briefing ended and the pilots filed out into the frozen night, Eric looked up at the stars. Somewhere beyond the North Sea, American bomber crews were probably doing the same thing, looking at the same stars, thinking about tomorrow. He wondered if they understood what awaited them. He wondered if they felt the cold certainty he felt, the knowledge that in the morning the sky would belong to the Luftwaffe. The mechanics were already at work, their tools clanking against metal in the darkness. Eric's Focke-Wulf 190A sat in its revetment like a crouched predator, its yellow nose and black fuselage barely visible in the moonlight. He ran his hand along the wing, feeling the rivets, the smoothness of the paint. "Tomorrow," he whispered to the aircraft, "tomorrow we teach them." Behind him, Becker lit another cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his boyish face. "Do you think they're afraid, the Americans?" Eric considered the question. "Probably, but fear doesn't matter. What matters is that they fly in straight lines, and we don't." They walked back toward the barracks, their breath fogging in the December air. Above them, the stars wheeled silently, indifferent to the violence that would soon unfold beneath them. The alarm bell shattered the morning darkness at 04:30 hours. Eric was already awake, had been for an hour, unable to sleep. He dressed quickly, thick flight suit, fur-lined boots, leather jacket with the Knight's Cross at his throat. His hands moved through the routine automatically, gloves, scarf, goggles, pistol in its holster. In the mess hall, pilots ate in near silence. The food was simple: black bread, ersatz coffee that tasted like burnt acorns, a slice of hard cheese. The war had stripped away the luxury of good rations, but nobody complained. They saved their energy for what was coming. Outside, the airfield had transformed into controlled chaos. Mechanics swarmed over the fighters, loading ammunition belts, checking hydraulics, warming engines. The sound of motors coughing into life filled the pre-dawn air. The distinctive growl of BMW radial engines, the sharper bark of the Daimler-Benz V12s. Eric's crew chief, a grizzled sergeant named Mueller, stood beside the Focke-Wulf. "She's ready, Herr Hauptmann. 4 MG-151 cannons, full ammunition. I put in your lucky rounds, the ones with your girl's initials." Eric smiled. There was no girl, never had been time for one, but the ritual mattered. "Thank you, Mueller. Keep the coffee hot." "Always do, sir." "And sir," Mueller's face turned serious, come back. The coffee tastes better when shared. At 06:15, the squadron assembled on the flight line. 14 Focke-Wulf 190As, their yellow noses pointed toward the graying eastern sky. Radio checks crackled through Eric's headset. Schwarze 7, check in. Schwarze 3, ready. Schwarze 3, ready. Down the line, each pilot confirmed. They were the Black 7 Squadron, named for the number painted on their tails. Veterans all, survivors of years that had killed most of their training classmates. Schwarze 7, you are cleared for takeoff. Vector 270, Angels 20. Good hunting. Eric pushed the throttle forward. The BMW engine roared, the fighter trembling with contained power. The Focke-Wulf accelerated down the runway, tail lifting, and then the earth fell away and Eric was climbing into the pearl gray morning. Formation assembly took 20 minutes. The fighters circled the airbase in a climbing spiral, joining up in flights of 4. At 20,000 feet, Eric leveled off and turned west. Below, Germany was a patchwork of white fields and dark forests, rivers like silver threads in the weak winter light. Schwarze 7, this is Adler Control. Big Friends bearing 285, range 40 kilometers, Angels 22. Count approximately 200 heavy bombers with fighter escort. 200 bombers? Eric's pulse quickened, but his voice remained steady. Understood, Adler. Schwarze 7 heading to intercept. He pushed the throttle to maximum cruise, the engine note rising. Around him, his squadron tucked in tight, a wedge of predators racing toward their prey. The sky ahead was empty, peaceful, unmarked by violence. Then he saw them. First, just glints of silver in the sunlight. Then the glints resolved into shapes, dozens, then hundreds of them, arranged in tight combat boxes. Boeing B-17 flying fortresses, their polished aluminum skins reflecting the morning sun like mobile mirrors. They flew in precise formation, each box supporting the others, creating what American tacticians called mutual protection. Eric had seen photographs, gun camera footage, intelligence drawings. None of it prepared him for the reality of seeing 200 heavy bombers stretching across 10 miles of sky. "Man Gott," someone breathed over the radio. "Formation looks good," Eric said, keeping his voice light. "That just means more targets. Schwarze 7, attack from high front. Dive through, then reform for stern attacks. Watch for escort fighters." He pulled back on the stick, climbing another 1,000 feet to gain the altitude advantage. The bombers grew larger, their formation unwavering despite surely seeing the German fighters by now. Their contrails stretched behind them like white roads through the sky. "They're not braking," Becker observed. "They're not even maneuvering." "Because they think their guns will save them," Eric replied. "Let's show them otherwise. All units, attack." He rolled inverted and pulled through, the horizon spinning as he positioned his fighter above and ahead of the lead bomber formation. The sun was behind him now, blinding the American gunners. Perfect. His dive accelerated rapidly. The airspeed indicator needle swung past 400 kilometers per hour, past 500. The bombers swelled in his gun sight, massive 4-engined aircraft, each one carrying 10 men and 6 tons of bombs. The lead bomber's nose arch showed a woman in a red dress. He centered his pipper on the cockpit. His thumbs found the cannon triggers. The Focke-Wulf shuddered as all 4 MG-151s opened fire simultaneously. 20mm shells arced toward the bomber at a combined rate of over 1,000 rounds per minute. Eric watched his tracers converge, watched them strike, and then the sky exploded. The Americans had been waiting. Every bomber in the lead formation opened fire at once. 50-caliber machine guns, 10 per aircraft, multiplied by dozens of aircraft, created a wall of lead so dense it seemed solid. Tracers crosshatched the sky in red and white lines, creating geometric patterns of death. Eric's fighter flew into that maelstrom. Something punched through his left wing. Something else shattered his canopy, filling the cockpit with screaming wind. A third round sparked off his engine cowling. He hauled back on the stick, breaking off the attack, his aircraft shuddering from multiple impacts. "Schwarze 4 is hit! Schwarze 4 going down!" Eric twisted in his seat, saw Lieutenant Krieger's fighter trailing black smoke, pieces falling from it like leaves. The young pilot struggled with his canopy. Then the aircraft entered a flat spin, and Krieger disappeared inside, unable to escape. "Brake left! Brake left!" Another fighter flashed past Eric's nose, its tail section torn completely off, tumbling through space like a child's discarded toy. He didn't see a parachute. The bombers flew on, untouched, their formation unbroken. "Reform on me," Eric commanded, his voice tight. "Stern attacks, watch your spacing." But the stern of a B-17 was where its heaviest guns concentrated. As Schwartz-Sieben repositioned for another pass, Eric reassessed what he was facing. These weren't the lumbering, under-defended bombers he'd expected. These were flying battleships, each one bristling with weapons, each crew trained to coordinate their fire. Inside the lead bomber, call sign Liberty Bell, Staff Sergeant Jack McCarthy crouched behind his waist gun, his face pressed against the rubber sight pad. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating the cordite smoke that filled the aircraft's interior. "Fighter, 3 o'clock high!" the call came from the ball turret gunner below. Jack swung his gun, saw the shark-like silhouette of a Focke-Wulf diving toward them. He pressed his thumb against the butterfly trigger. The .50 caliber gun roared, shell casings clattering onto the floor, the weapon hammering against his shoulder. He couldn't tell if he hit anything. The fighter disappeared beneath their aircraft, then reappeared seconds later, climbing away. Other fighters were everywhere now, weaving through the formation, their cannons winking orange fire. Liberty Bell shuddered as cannon shells walked across her fuselage. The radio operator's compartment exploded in a shower of sparks. The top turret gunner kept firing, his guns traversing smoothly, professionally. "Number 3 engine taking hits," the flight engineer's voice, urgent but controlled. Jack looked out his window, saw the engine trailing smoke, oil streaked across the cowling. But the propeller kept turning, the engine still producing power. The B-17 held formation. Another bomber wasn't as lucky. 200 yards to their right, a fortress erupted in flame. The entire aircraft seemed to peel apart, wings folding up, fuselage breaking in half. Small figures tumbled from it, men without parachutes or parachutes that wouldn't deploy in time. Jack looked away. Couldn't think about that. Had to focus on the guns, on the fighters still attacking. A Messerschmitt came straight at them, head-on, its cannons sparkling. Jack fired a burst, saw his tracers intersect with the fighter's path. The Messerschmitt's canopy shattered, the fighter snap-rolled and plunged away, trailing pieces. "Good shooting, Waste," the pilot's voice over the intercom. But there was no time for celebration. More fighters were lining up, and they were still 30 minutes from the target. Bremen lay ahead, its factories and rail yards waiting to be destroyed, its flak batteries waiting to destroy them. Eric positioned Schwartz-Sieben for another attack. They had knocked down perhaps a dozen bombers. He'd lost count in the chaos, but the formation kept coming. For every bomber that fell, 20 more flew on, their bombs still loaded, their determination unshaken. He selected a straggler, a B-17 trailing white vapor from a damaged engine falling behind the protection of the main formation. Easier prey. He signaled Becker to follow and began his approach, coming up from below and behind, where the ventral guns had limited traverse. The bomber grew in his windscreen. He could see the ball turret tracking toward him, the small figure of the gunner visible inside the plexiglass sphere. Eric jinked left, right, making himself harder to hit. His gun sights settled on the bomber's wing root. Catastrophic damage there would break the aircraft apart. He fired. His cannon shells tore into the bomber's wing, metal peeled back, fuel streamed out in a white mist. The bomber lurched, dropped a wing, started to spiral. Then the ball turret found him. 50 caliber rounds hammered into Eric's fighter. His instrument panel exploded. Something hot sliced across his left arm. The engine coughed, missed, coughed again. Oil pressure dropping, coolant temperature rising. The controls felt mushy, unresponsive. "I'm hit," he reported, voice steady despite the pain. "Schwartz-Sieben, continue without me. I'm heading home." He pushed the stick forward, diving away from the battle, leaving the bombers to continue their inexorable march toward Bremen. Behind him, the sky was filled with smoke trails, falling aircraft, the distant thunder of hundreds of engines. The Americans weren't laughing, but neither was he.
Bremen appeared on the horizon as a smudge of industrial haze. Its factories had fed the German war machine for 3 years. U-boat pens, aircraft assembly plants, ball bearing works. Now those factories would burn. Liberty Bell was dying, but she flew on. The number 3 engine had failed completely, its propeller feathered to reduce drag. Number 4 was running rough, losing oil pressure. The hydraulic system was compromised. Jack could see fluid streaming from holes in the fuselage, evaporating in the slipstream. Half their guns were jammed or destroyed. The radio operator was dead, killed by cannon fire. The bald turret gunner had taken shrapnel in both legs, but refused morphine, staying at his guns. Through it all, The pilot held formation. 2 minutes to IP, the navigator called out. Initial point, where they would begin their bomb run, flying straight and level, unable to maneuver. Perfect targets for the flak batteries below. The flak started before they reached the IP. Black puffs materialized around them, each one marking where an 88mm shell had detonated, filling a sphere of sky with white-hot shrapnel. The puffs came in clusters, appeared in neat rows as the German anti-aircraft batteries walked their fire through the formation. A bomber ahead of them flew into a flak burst. The explosion was instantaneous. One moment an aircraft, the next an expanding ball of orange fire and black smoke. No parachutes. 10 men ceased to exist in less than a second. "Bomb bay doors open," the bombardier announced. "I have the aircraft." Now they were committed. No evasive action, no breaking formation. Just straight and level flight while the bombardier made minute adjustments, lining up the Norden bomb site, calculating wind drift and altitude and airspeed. The flak intensified. The air itself seemed to turn solid with explosions. Liberty Bell bucked and shuddered as shrapnel tore through her aluminum skin. Another burst, close enough that Jack felt the concussion through the aircraft's frame. His ears rang. Everything smelled like cordite and burning insulation. "Steady, steady," the bombardier's voice, preternaturally calm. He looked down. Bremen lay below them like a miniature. Streets and buildings and factories rendered tiny by altitude. He could see people down there, civilians and soldiers, all about to experience what aerial warfare truly meant. "Bombs away!" The aircraft lurched upward as 6,000 pounds of high explosive dropped free. All across the formation, bomb bay doors stood open, dark shapes tumbling toward the city. He watched them fall, watched them shrink to invisibility, and then the first bombs hit. Even from 22,000 feet, the explosions were visible, white flashes that rippled across the factory complex, followed by rolling clouds of smoke and debris. Secondary explosions erupted as fuel stores and ammunition dumps cooked off. Within seconds, multiple fires merged into a single conflagration. Bremen was burning. "Let's get the hell out of here," the pilot said. But getting out was harder than getting in. Eric's fighter had made it as far as the outskirts of Bremen when his engine quit completely. The propeller windmilled uselessly. The BMW radio seized from loss of oil, superheated metal fusing together. He had perhaps 3 minutes of glide time before he had to abandon the aircraft or attempt a dead-stick landing. Below him, the city was under attack. He could see the bombers overhead, their formations ragged now, but still coherent, still dropping their deadly cargo. The sound reached him even through his leather helmet, a deep, rolling thunder that shook the air. His aircraft was losing altitude rapidly. The controls barely responded. He looked around for a landing site. There, a field outside the city, covered in snow but relatively flat. He might survive this. Then he saw the bomber. It was the straggler he had attacked, the one whose wing he had shredded. It was going down too, both right engines dead, the wing on fire, limping away from the target area. As Eric watched, figures began jumping from it, parachutes blossoming in the cold air, white mushrooms against the gray sky. 1, 2, 3, only 5 parachutes. The bomber carried 10 men. The aircraft entered a death spiral, rotating faster and faster as the damaged wing lost all lift. It fell like a stone, trailing fire and smoke, and impacted in the same field Eric had selected for his own landing. The explosion was tremendous. A fireball erupted, followed by a pillar of black smoke. Debris scattered across the snow, pieces of wing, chunks of fuselage, a propeller blade spinning through the air like a thrown axe. Eric fought his own aircraft down, gliding in with no power, no flaps, just gravity and momentum. He hit hard, the landing gear collapsing immediately, the fighter sliding sideways across the frozen field. His head cracked against the gun sight. Stars burst across his vision. The aircraft spun once, twice, then came to rest 50 meters from the burning wreckage of the American bomber. He sat stunned for a moment, tasting blood, his left arm screaming pain where the bullet had grazed it. Then, training took over. He popped the canopy release, pulled off his harness, climbed out onto the wing. His legs barely supported him. The bomber wreckage was an inferno. Ammunition cooked off in the flames, sending tracers streaking in random directions. Eric stumbled away from it, fell, picked himself up. That's when he saw the bodies. They had been thrown clear during the impact, or perhaps jumped too late. 3 American airmen lay scattered in the snow, their flight suits torn, their bodies broken. One still wore his oxygen mask. Another had his eyes open, staring sightlessly at the sky. Eric fell to his knees in the snow. He had killed 47 aircraft. He knew that meant hundreds of men, but he'd never seen them like this. Close enough to touch, close enough to see their youth, their common humanity. One of them had a photograph tucked into his breast pocket, visible through the torn fabric. A girl, smiling. "We laughed," Eric whispered. "We called them coffins." Behind him, someone groaned. He turned, saw movement near the bomber's tail section. A man crawling through the snow, his flight suit choked with blood. Eric ran to him, fell beside him. It was an American gunner, maybe 20 years old, his face soot blackened, his eyes glazed with shock. He looked at Eric's uniform, at the Knight's Cross, and tried to raise his hands in surrender. The gesture was pitiful, weak. "Don't move," Eric said in German, then tried English. "Still, you are safe." The American's lips moved. "Jack. My name is Jack." "Eric, you fought well, all of you." Jack coughed, blood on his lips. "We're not coffins. We're homes, until they burn." Eric tore open Jack's flight suit, found the source of bleeding, shrapnel in the abdomen. Serious, but maybe survivable. He packed the wound with cloth from his own scarf, applied pressure. Around them, the bomber continued to burn, the flames consuming everything that had once been an aircraft, that had once carried men who laughed and loved and dreamed. In the distance, Eric heard vehicles approaching. German troops coming to investigate the crash. They would take Jack prisoner, get him medical care. He would survive, probably spend the rest of the war in a Stalag camp. "Why? Why do you—" "Help me," Jack whispered. Eric looked at the bodies in the snow, then up at the sky where contrails still marked the passage of hundreds of bombers. The war stretched ahead and behind, an endless cycle of violence and death. But here, in this moment, he could choose something different. "Because I am tired of burning." Above them, the sound of engines faded as the bomber formations turned for home. Behind them, Bremen burned. In the field, 2 enemies waited together. For rescue, united by nothing except exhaustion and the shared understanding that the sky had taken too much from both of them. The German troops arrived 10 minutes later. They loaded Jack onto a stretcher, handled him with surprising gentleness. An officer approached Eric, saluted. "Herr Hauptmann, are you injured?" "Superficial. The American needs immediate medical attention. He is a brave soldier." The officer looked surprised, but nodded.
As they carried Jack away, the young gunner raised his hand in what might have been a wave or a salute. Eric returned the gesture. He stood alone in the field then, surrounded by wreckage and death, the smoke from Bremen visible on the horizon. This was victory, technically. They had shot down dozens of bombers, killed hundreds of Americans. But as Eric looked at his burning fighter, at the crater where Liberty Bell had died, at the bodies in the snow, victory felt like ash in his mouth. Schwarzesieben would fly again tomorrow, and the Americans would return. The cycle would continue until one side or the other could no longer sustain the losses. Looking at the scale of today's raid, at the determination it represented, Eric knew which side that would be. The aces had stopped laughing. The sky had burned the pride out of them, leaving only the bitter knowledge that courage and skill weren't enough, had never been enough. Reflection, ashes and iron. The prisoner collection point was a converted schoolhouse in Bremen suburbs. Inside, wounded American airmen lay on cots while German medical staff worked to save them. The scene bore an eerie similarity to Luftwaffe field hospitals, the same sounds of pain, the same smell of antiseptic and blood, the same exhaustion on the faces of young men who had seen too much. Eric arrived after debriefing, his arm properly bandaged now, his uniform cleaned of blood and soot.
He found Jack in a corner bed, his abdomen wrapped in white gauze, an IV drip feeding morphine into his system. The American's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but steady. "He'll live," a German doctor said, approaching Eric. "The surgery went well. You saved his life with that field dressing." Eric nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He sat in a chair beside Jack's bed, suddenly aware of how tired he was. Bone-deep exhaustion. The kind came from more than physical exertion. The kind that came from confronting something you'd spent years avoiding. Jack's eyes opened. For a moment, confusion crossed his face, then recognition. "You," he said softly. "Me," I agreed. "How do you feel?" "Like I got shot down and crashed. At least I got shot down by an ace. That's something, right?" "You counted my kills?" "The Knight's Cross kinda gave it away. 47, the guard said. Congratulations." I looked at my hands. I used to think that number meant something. Proof that I was skilled, that I was winning. I paused. Now I think it just means I survived longer than 47 other men. 48, Jack corrected. You shot us down today. No, you're alive. That doesn't count anymore. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the sounds of Bremen, fire trucks, ambulances, the distant crump of bombs still cooking off in the ruins. The raid had destroyed 3 factories and killed hundreds of civilians. Tomorrow the Americans would come back and destroy 3 more, and the day after that until there was nothing to destroy. "We laughed at your bombers," I said at last. "In the briefing room yesterday, we called them flying coffins. We thought you were amateurs, that this would be easy." I met Jack's eyes. We didn't understand what kind of men flew them. Jack was quiet for a long moment. "You want to know the truth? We were terrified. Most of us had maybe 20 hours in a B-17 before they shipped us over. We knew the losses were bad, knew we probably wouldn't survive a full tour. But we came anyway." "Why?" "Because someone had to. Because those factories you're defending make the guns that kill our friends. Because—" Jack trailed off, searching for words. "Because we believed it mattered, that stopping this war mattered more than whether we individually made it home." I thought about my own motivations. Pride, duty, defense of the homeland. Had any of them been as clear, as selfless as what Jack described? Or had I just been chasing glory, collecting kills like hunting trophies? "Your formation tactics, the defensive fire coordination, that's not amateur flying." "We learned fast, had to. The first few raids were massacres. I watched 18 bombers go down on the Schweinfurt mission. 180 men just gone. But the survivors took notes, changed tactics. Next time we lost fewer. The time after that, fewer still. You're not just absorbing losses, you're adapting." "Yeah, and you know what? For every bomber you shoot down, we're building 3 more. For every gunner you kill, 5 more are training. My crew, my plane, we were just one part of something bigger, something that can't be stopped by even the best pilots." "You are right. I know it. I saw the numbers in intelligence briefings, watched the formations grow larger each week. The Americans had industrial capacity Germany couldn't match, manpower reserves Germany couldn't match. They could afford to take losses that would cripple the Luftwaffe." "The war is over," I said quietly. "We just haven't stopped fighting yet." "Maybe, but it's not over for me. I'm heading to a prison camp. Not over for you. You'll be back in that fighter as soon as your arm heals. You look at me seriously. The question is whether we learn anything from this, whether all that burning meant something." A guard approached, indicating visiting time was ending. Eric stood, straightened his uniform. Before leaving, he turned back to Jack. "Your bomber, Liberty Bell. That was his name?" "Yeah. Stupid name for a machine that killed us, right?" "No, because she wasn't a coffin. She was home." I stopped at the doorway. "I'm sorry I burned your home. I'm sorry I had to shoot at yours." Eric walked out into the December evening. The sky was clear now, the bombers long gone, leaving only contrails to mark their passage. Tomorrow, Schwarze-Sieben would fly again. Tomorrow, more Americans would die. Tomorrow, he might die. But tonight he understood something he hadn't before. The men in those bombers weren't targets. They were soldiers, doing their duty, believing in something larger than themselves. They deserved respect, not mockery. And if they had to die, if he had to kill them, then at least let it be done with honor, not arrogance. He looked up at the contrails, slowly dissipating in the cold air. Each one had been drawn by engines, by men, by the terrible mathematics of war. The aces had stopped laughing. The sky had burned the pride out of them, leaving only the clarity that came from standing too close to fire. In the schoolhouse behind him, an American gunner slept fitfully, dreaming of a bomber called Liberty Bell. In the hospital 3 blocks away, Lieutenant Krieger's mother was being told her son would never come home. In England, American crews were preparing for tomorrow's mission, knowing the odds, climbing into their fortresses anyway. The war continued. The sky waited. And Erich Voss, ace pilot of the Luftwaffe, walked back to his airbase with the weight of 48 kills on his shoulders and the knowledge that not one of them had made any difference at all. Epilogue. The Sound of Engines. Germany, 1958. The museum stood on the outskirts of Munich, a converted hangar that now housed relics from a war the country was still learning to process. Eric walked through it slowly, his cane tapping against the concrete floor. The old wound in his arm ached in winter. It always had, even after 15 years. He passed German fighters first, a Messerschmitt, a Focke-Wulf, their paintwork restored, their machines silent. They looked smaller than he remembered, more fragile. Hard to believe men had died in them, harder still to believe he'd survived so many missions. Then he turned a corner and stopped. The B-17 dominated the exhibition hall. They'd restored her beautifully. Polished aluminum skin, clear plexiglass nose, guns in their turrets, all 4 engines gleaming. The placard beside her read, Boeing B-17G Flying Fortress, delivered 1943, survived 32 combat missions, nicknamed Memphis Belle. Not Liberty Bell. That bomber had burned in a field near Bremen, taking 5 men with it. But looking at this aircraft, Eric could see Jack's bomber, could remember the way it had fought even while dying, the way its crew had refused to quit. A recording played over hidden speakers, the sound of Wright Cyclone engines at cruise power, that distinctive deep throb of American radial engines in formation. To most visitors,
It was just historical ambiance. To Eric, it was something else. He stood before the bomber for a long time. Other visitors moved around him, teenagers who'd never known war, parents explaining history to children, veterans like himself, all here to remember or learn or pay respects. A man approached, walking with a slight limp. American accent. Impressive, isn't she? Eric turned, saw a man about his age, wearing a flight jacket with old squadron patches sewn on. Very much so. She's a beast. Took everything the Luftwaffe could throw at her and kept flying. I gunned on one. Not this specific bird, but same model. 93rd Bomb Group. Eric's pulse quickened. When did you serve? 43 through 44. Got shot down over Bremen, spent the rest of the war as a guest of your country. The American extended his hand. Jack McCarthy, Sergeant, 8th Air Force. Eric stared at the hand, then at the face. Older now, lines of age replacing the smoothness of youth, but the eyes were the same, steady, direct, knowing. I'm Erich Voss, he said, taking the hand. Hauptmann, Jagdgeschwader 26. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Jack smiled slowly. Well, I'll be damned. The ace who saved my life. The gunner who shut me down. Want to argue about who got who? We could probably do that all day. They laughed, quietly, mindful of where they were, but genuine laughter nonetheless. The weight of 13 years lifted slightly. They weren't enemies anymore, hadn't been for a long time. Just 2 old soldiers, meeting by chance in a museum dedicated to the machines that had tried to kill them both. You survived the war, Eric observed. Barely. Spent 2 years in Stalag Lift 3, came home in 45 and tried to forget everything. He gestured at the B-17. Didn't work. The sound of engines. I still hear them in my dreams. So I figured I'd face it head on. Came to Europe, visited the old bases, the old battlefields, trying to make peace with it all.
I understand. I still wake up sometimes, diving through formations, watching bombers fall. I tell myself it was war.